So, types of forecasts that are explained in the book. Economic, technological, demand forecasts. Yes. But in our countries, there are other forecasts that are as important, if not more so. For example, supply forecasts. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has made this abundantly clear for everybody. But usually in developed countries they didn't have to think too much about that. This situation has changed, most certainly, in the past 2 years. But for example, environmental forecasts, political, social, those kinds of forecasts here are very, very important. There's a lot of instability, a lot of transitory state for conditions. Why is forecasting so important? Well, forecasting is the only information we have of a reality until we get hard data. But hard data, usually, it's a post-mortem. And we need to act before things happen. So that's why we use forecasts. We need information in order to be able to plan for people, capacity, supplies, whatever. And what are the stages then that we use in a forecasting system? Well, first we define what are we going to use that information for. If you don't know what are you going to, what is your need for the information, don't get into this exercise. It will be ludicrous. Then you select the items for which you're going to forecast. You don't forecast just in the air. You define the time horizon, you select the model that you're going to apply, you collect the data to make the forecast, you make the forecast, and then you validate and implement the results. Remember, always you must know what are you forecasting for. Otherwise, don't even lose your time or use resources. Now, please keep in mind that forecasts are rarely perfect. We assume always some kind of stability, be it either a trend, seasonality, tendency. And when we use families of products, they tend to be more accurate than individual products, which brings us immediately to the law of the great numbers. And what is the law of great numbers, or the law of large numbers? Well, essentially it's considered the first fundamental theorem of probability theory. I'm not going to read this for you. You can read it on your own. But in plain English, the behavior of a group that is sufficiently large can be statistically predicted. And this is very strong because it allows us to use mathematical tools instead of having to read the entrails of a chicken, or the form of the clouds, or the flight of the doves, as we tended to use in old times. Today we tend to use mathematical tools. And there's a lovely book that's called Against the Odds that explains clearly how all this measurement of risk and forecasting was developed throughout times. I highly recommend that you read it. As a consequence of this law of large numbers, the behavior of the masses are predictable. an individual's behavior is not. And the approaches for forecasting are two. We have qualitative and we have quantitative forecasts. Usually a combination of both is best for our business. Now, there are certain components for time series that we must be very, very careful. One, tendency or trend. Second, seasonality or periodicity, the cycles, and certain random variations. All these aspects we need to keep in mind, otherwise our forecasts are not going to be useful at all. So let's take a quick look to the qualitative methods overview. For example, the first one is the executive opinion jury. Bristol-Myers Squibb usually uses 220 scientific researchers to see what they think. These are people who know their stuff, and they say, okay, this is our consensus, or this is what we think. Then there's the proposal of the commercial personnel, the people who are working in marketing, and say, okay, this is what we hear from our clients. Remember that marketing is in charge of the communications with the client. They know what the market trends are. They look everything in the field. Then there's the Delphi method, where we gather a series of people between 5 and 10, and they create their forecasts. And finally, there's market research, where we go and ask. There are a lot of tools for developing market research. We're not going to be covering all of them. On the quantitative methods overview side, we have the simple approach, that's the naive, where we believe that tomorrow will behave itself exactly as today or as yesterday. We have moving averages, we have exponential smoothing, we have trend projection, and we have linear regression. Let's go a little bit further down the road with each one of them. Our lesson will continue in the next video.